And welcome to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider. Thank you for tuning in to what might be the most important political show you'll listen to today. Why? Well, we talk about local and state level issues. Issues you can actually make a difference in by getting active and involved. Every day we roll out top political stories and headlines, most of which you were probably unaware of, all of which deal with state and local level issues. Remember, all politics is local and you can make a difference. And today we have some pretty important topics to discuss. We have the GOP putting out a new private poll on the governor's and attorney general's race. Lexington City Councilwoman unveils a grand idea of how to deal with the homeless, and it deals with laundry and showers. Newly elected Louisville Mayor Greenberg said affordable housing is a top priority all during his campaign, but magically, surprise, 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 we're 5 months in, he has no plan. Just another promise, an empty promise from a Democrat politician that he really cares about things. Speaking of Louisville, the state FOP president, Ryan Straw, had tweeted out here over this past week that it is no longer viable for them to have a fallen officers memorial in downtown Louisville because it keeps getting vandalized. Last week, Governor Beshear came under fire for having two long-term vacant board seats on the state's Board of Education. Then magically was able to fill those vacancies as the controversy grew. So we have all those stories and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Stay tuned, stay informed, and let's dive into it. So starting us off, the Republican Party of Kentucky has released a new poll that they have done through Signal. That's a pretty good polling firm. It has a margin of error of about 3.92%. And the amount polled was about 600 likely voters. And we're going to talk about three items that they asked here. They asked about the Attorney General's race. They asked about, actually, we'll talk about four. They asked about the presidential. They asked about favorability for presidents and then also then for governor candidates. They asked about the governor's race and they asked about the attorney general's race. And we're going to zero in on a few of those things here. So first, the attorney general's race that they polled in. Right now, it is showing that Russell Coleman really pulling away with that. So out of those polled, 20.9% said they'd vote definitely Republican Russell Coleman. 18.3% said they'd probably vote for Russell Coleman. That gives us about a 40%, 39.2% of the electorate saying, look, I'm voting for Russell Coleman for Attorney General. And keep in mind, they haven't even ran ads yet. You probably listening to this don't necessarily even know who our candidates are. You have Republican Russell Coleman running, and then you have Democrat Pamela Stevenson running for office there in those positions. But anyways, and then for the Democrat, Pamela Stevens, what they have there is she has only 11.3% saying they're probably voting for them, and then only 17.2% saying that they're definitely voting for her, leaving her with just 28.5%. That's over an 11-point lead to Republican Russell Coleman, and then 32.3% undecided. Now, what's interesting about that undecided number, that can be, is there really 32.3% undecided out there? No. You know, polling gets a little funky when it's down ticket races. Nobody wants to, not nobody, but a lot of people, they don't want to just come out and say, I'm voting straight Republican necessarily. But when they walk in, if they're conservative, they're Republican. If Russell Coleman or Pamela Stevens both haven't made a good push to them, they're going to vote, generally speaking, for just whomever, either the party, the person they're voting for at the top of the ticket, or whomever they normally vote for, whether it's in races. And they're like, well, Republican, right? That's better than nothing. I just don't know anything about them. And that is how some people vote. So right now, being at those levels certainly shows a problem for Pamela Stevenson. We're definitely going to be seeing attacks out of that election. They're going to have to. But then on the governor's race, they asked the same question about Daniel Cameron and Andy Beshear. Are you voting for him? 34.8% said they're definitely voting for Daniel Cameron. 41.4% said they're definitely voting Democrat Andy Beshear. So you'd say, well, Andy Beshear's got a big lead there, but then probably only 5.4% are probably voting for Andy Beshear, and meanwhile, Daniel Cameron has 11.9%. That's 46.7% voting for Daniel Cameron and 46.8% voting for Andy Beshear. That is pretty tight and neck, but this is a real problem. What this ballot, with this poll really says for Andy Beshear is he's in a bad situation, because when we move on to the favorability, okay, so out of these people polled, favorable, Joe Biden, 35% said they view him favorably. Donald Trump, 52.1% said they view him favorably. Andy Beshear, 55.3% view him favorably. And then Daniel Cameron, 45.5%. So out of Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Andy Beshear, and Daniel Cameron, Andy Beshear has the best favorable ratings. So you say, well, that may be a problem then for Daniel Cameron, because he's 10, 11, 12 points behind on Andy Beshear. But this is where they've got a problem, because they're neck and neck. Remember, they asked them, who are you voting for? And so they're neck and neck. Well, what becomes a problem for Andy Beshear is when you go to very unfavorable. You see them once again neck and neck, 27.2% Andy Beshear, 27.8% for Daniel Cameron. But then you move into no opinion. No opinion, okay? Only 3.3% of people have no opinion on Andy Beshear. Meanwhile, 11.1% have no opinion on Daniel Cameron. That is Andy Beshear's big problem. The big problem is everybody knows who he is. According to this poll, everybody has already made up their mind on how they feel about Andy Beshear. Are they for him, or are they against him, or what have you? And yet they're still neck and neck in this poll for the election. Meanwhile, you got 11.1% who still haven't made up their mind on if they like Daniel Cameron or not. That's a big problem for Andy Beshear, because when you go back down to the governor's race, only 6.5% were undecided. Well, out of that 6.5%, 5% of them apparently already at least already have an opinion of Andy Beshear of some sort. Only 20 people polled had no opinion of Andy Beshear. Otherwise, they either viewed him favorably, unfavorably, or very unfavorably, no opinion. Those are the options. Was favorable, very favorable, unfavorable, very unfavorable. So while Daniel Cameron may not be as high in that favorability, but a big part of that is he hasn't started running ads. He hasn't really drawn out what he's done to the general population. And obviously with 11.1%, they just don't have an opinion of him to begin with. So what is Andy Beshear to do here? I mean, obviously he's going to have to go over Daniel Cameron, but I would say this early out, neck and neck, everybody already has an opinion of you, though. This is a big, big problem for Andy Beshear. He's going to really have to push hard on trying. He's got to keep his coalition together and then also try to go at Daniel Cameron. That's why issues like what we talked about yesterday. Yesterday, we'd spoken about this transgender person running for state house out of Lexington. That's why those issues become a really big problem for Andy Beshear. He can't afford to lose anybody. And we've gone over some of the poll numbers on some of these social issues, like the transgender issues, like the kids at drag show issues. And they're not good for Andy Beshear, even amongst Democrats. And so he's backing himself into a corner. He's backed himself into a corner because of his radical base. Daniel Cameron, we know, is going to pounce. It's going to be interesting to see how this messaging works out moving into the election time. Freshman council member Tanya Fogel out of Lexington's upset. She represents a district that covers the corner there of where Lyric Theater and that Marathon gas station are in Lexington. It's at, I believe, Elman 3rd. And at Elman 3rd, now anybody who lives in Lexington, drives through that area, or has ever been through there like I have, that is a awful street corner. They sell drugs there. There's always people lined up there. You're seeing 10, 15, 20, 30 people sometimes all sitting in that area there. And frankly, the good, upstanding Lexingtonians that are fed up with this said, look, we're tired of this. And they started calling the police asking for more patrols. And then also the Marathon gas station there was calling as well. And they've made arrests over the past few weeks there. And most of those arrests involve criminal trespassing or some drug issues as well. Some disorderly in traffic, those kinds of things. See, Lexington, it's unconstitutional to make panhandling illegal. So they said, hey, if you're walking through traffic in an unsafe manner, that is an arrestable offense. And this has really upset Tanya Fogel. She doesn't want to see them arrested. Now, keep in mind, one of these arrests are for criminal trespassing. What that means is you are on my private property. You've come onto it. And now you are causing a problem. I have asked you to leave. You have refused to do so. And in Lexington, and I know this from owning a business that's had to deal with these situations, it is not enough for the Lexington police that I simply have said, look, I've told these people to leave. They now aren't leaving. Arrest them. The Lexington police themselves have stated that unless they have it on body camera of them telling them to have left, and then they come back and they're not gone, then they will arrest him. So this doesn't just mean that the business owner, because this is their policy, according to what I've been informed when I've had to deal with criminal trespass cases of people coming onto my business. And so what that means is these people have come onto private property where a person is trying to conduct business. They have been asked to leave. They've caused such a ruckus that the police then came. They stayed there for the police to come, by the way. The police then told them to leave. They then didn't. Or the police had to come back out and arrest them again for being out there. And now they're getting charged with criminal trespassing. Oh, Tanya Fogel says, no, we can't arrest them. You do not represent those homeless people there. They're not your constituent. The people who own property and business. And you know what? You're going to be crying as these businesses leave your community. We see that now as we see Targets and Walmarts and CVS's leaving places where they no longer can operate because of the crime, because of the theft, because of those issues. And so instead, you're sitting there saying, no, we shouldn't be arresting people for, criminal trespass, meaning violating private property and private businesses' constitutional rights to have and be secure in their own property. She says, no, we shouldn't be arresting them for that. Well, what are you going to do when those businesses leave? When those people leave? You're not representing your district well, but putting that to the side, what does Tanya Fogel want to see? Well, don't arrest people for breaking the law. No. She says instead that, well, they're just missing dignity. And we just got to give them dignity. If we just give them a shower, a place to use the bathroom, a place to do their laundry, that dignity there will stop them from committing crimes. Tanya, listen to me. You're wrong. They're committing crimes because most likely, they're on drugs. They have no ability to earn a living, not because there's not jobs, but because of decisions they have made, which has made them now where they have this addiction issue. And you're not going to solve that providing them a shower and a place to do their laundry. They're not like, well, I was going to use drugs, but now they have clean clothes and clean hair. Never mind. That isn't going to happen. What, you think, well, I was going to continue my life of crime, but now that I have clean clothes and clean hair and I've had a place to use the bathroom, I'll go out and get a job. Is that what you think is going to happen? You have got to deal with the drug issues. And the way you deal with that is through arrests for breaking the law. It is through making sure that the dealers and the traffickers that are bringing these drugs in are held accountable. Put them in a position where if you're going to be on the street, we should be arresting people more and more for being on the street. Let me tell you a story. I was down in Hopkinsville. And I was at an event there. It was later at night. And I was at an event. I went to they have a little 24/7 burger joint there downtown. And me and my wife were there. And we were eating. And I think it was like 11 p.m. And a guy came in all upset. And he's apparently a unhoused individual or whatever that was panhandling on the street. And he goes, I was just arrested. They said, what for? And he goes, well, a guy pulled up and he's handing me $1 and it's illegal in Hopkinsville to step out in the street and grab $1. Same it is here in Lexington, but they actually enforce it in Hopkinsville because they don't have council people like Tanya Fogel. They have a Republican city council, so they're not putting up with this stuff. Lexington, take note. Anyways, And he said, and I stepped out to grab, well, I turned to the cop and said, can I grab that dollar? And he says, if you do, you'll know what happens. Well, and then I reached out and grabbed the dollar and he arrested me. He set me up. Well, no, he didn't. He did tell you exactly what would happen. That was the first thing. But the second thing is good. You're being held accountable to the law. And you know what his decision was? He's leaving that town. He wasn't coming back. I heard this conversation play out. He isn't coming back to that community. He's not from that community. He's not coming back to that community because they're not raising a flag of saying, come here, come here. You don't, I get it. I hear you all that you feel bad for these individuals. And there's trust me, there's a plethora of programs for these individuals to get into. There is not an issue with these programs existing. The issue is they don't want to join it because it requires them to not do drugs. There's all these programs that help them with homelessness, help them with addiction even, to help them with all these things they don't want in it because it requires them to not do drugs. And that is why also at the same time, that they're being required not to do drugs while they're committing crimes and everything else. So then they should be arrested. See, follow me here. Plethora of programs for you to get into so you can fix yourself so it doesn't lead to crime. But if you're not going to fix yourself and you're going to keep doing crime and affecting those in this community and you get arrested, well, then you're going to be off drugs, hopefully, you're in jail. And it's going to be harder for you to get drugs, and it gives you an opportunity to get clean. One way or another, you're having an opportunity to be clean. It is not... you're not being helpful to your community, and you're not helping these people by continuing to enable them. And I'm talking to Tanya Fogel, and I'm talking to those individuals that keep giving money to panhandlers. Don't do it. You're enabling them. You might be giving them the money they need to go purchase the next hit of drugs that causes them to overdose. That's a cold, hard truth. Stop giving money to them. There is a plethora of programs. If you feel called to give money to one of these individuals, donate instead to one of those programs. Donate instead of one of those. But you don't need to be sitting there saying, look, they just need showers, bathrooms, laundry. That's all they need. Tanya, you're wrong. And no matter how you want to dress it up, the way you fix these issues is you arrest criminals. Speaking of these issues in Louisville, Mayor Greenberg, who newly take over, he's about 5-6 months in, he made a big promise, 15,000 affordable housing homes there in Louisville, but yet at this point has yet to follow through on his promise. Well, part of the problem is the government shouldn't be in the business of building 15,000 affordable houses. What do you think his plan was? To go out and confiscate wealth from a bunch of citizens and build 15,000 homes? Well, that's what the liberals would want you to do. That's what those crazy far left individuals like Tanya Fogel's like, yeah, let's just take money from the taxpayers who these people are committing crimes against, and let's just build them houses or give them showers and things. Like that's the answer. It's not all these other issues. But anyways, so he says, look, we need to look at affordable housing. Let's build 15,000 homes. Well, the way you do that is by deregulating, by getting rid of over-restrictive zoning laws, by removing requirements as far as rent fixture and affordable housing, or requirements. See, there's some requirements in some of these cities that when you build housing or build apartments or things, certain numbers of them have to be affordable, quote unquote, affordable housing, rent controlled, while the rest of them aren't, or Section 8 housing. And it discourages people from building. You're discouraging people from building. And some of the historical rules about knocking buildings down and rebuilding, those types of issues, that discourages it. Then also as well, who wants to build an apartment building in a part of town that is rampant with crime? Once again, this goes back to what I was just talking about. You want affordable housing to come in? It shouldn't come from the government. It needs to come from private developers. But nobody wants to develop and invest in an area that's rampant with crime and theft and all these other issues. But yet, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to say, look, we can solve this problem. Well, I've got news for them. You're not going to get affordable housing from the private industry when you have issues like this tweet here from the state FOP president regarding their fallen officers monument in Louisville. This is the way he tweeted out. He said, our monument vandalized again. For years, the FOP lodges in Louisville have discussed moving our memorial from downtown due to continued issues with protecting the actual monument. Every time the President's Council decides that taking the memorial from a central location would not give LEOs opportunities to stand and pay the respect to our fallen brothers and sisters. The love for law enforcement, especially our fallen, has sadly left our city. It is no longer viable to have a memorial downtown. Consider this priority number one for the 8 FOP lodges in Louisville. We will not stand by and allow those who break the law to inflict even more pain and grief on the survivors of those fallen officers. Louisville is better than this. I hope our leaders will join the FOP in finding a solution that honors their memory. I got to tell you something, Ryan. I feel for you. I think you're a little wrong there. I don't think Louisville's better than that, because that is what Louisville has become. Louisville has become a city that believes that their law enforcement is the stem of all of their problems, because reality, they just deny reality. They see businesses and people leaving downtown. The mayor's trying to bring people back into downtown, can't achieve it. Why? Because it's unsafe. It is not a safe place to be. I mean, let me ask you this. Would you want to build your business in a place that's been vandalized and attacked every year after year after year, through protests and riots regarding ridiculous protests and riots a lot of times? Would you want to do that? Over ridiculous issues? Your business is going to be vandalized because of that? No, absolutely you wouldn't. And of course, these people don't understand, or they believe, well, the police are our problem. The police are not your problem. They're not. And I hear people talking about things about police reform and issues like that. And while I see some points of where you're going to, in general, understand this: our government was constituted. See, this is a funny thing. People will point out things like, right, "Don't tread on me" flag. For those of you listening, I have a "Don't tread on me" flag behind me in the corner. They'll point at that and say, well, you can't support the police while also flying that, because the police are the ones who'll tread on you. Let me tell you a story. When I was standing up against government overreach and tyranny at my business Brood, and I refused to shut down in the face of COVID mandates, the health department here had called the police to come out and arrest me and shut me down. And they said, until we have a judge ruling on this, we're not coming out there. In that situation, the police protected my rights. They didn't violate them. They protected them. That's the kind of engagement we need with the police. Look, we need to make sure that our police are following our Constitution, understanding that they're there to enforce our constitutional rights, including protecting us from the government. And frankly, there is no way that your rights are secure without the police. I'm just telling you right now, there's no way that everybody's rights are secure. Somebody like me, maybe I'm able to defend myself from a person too, but the only thing that stops roving gangs from coming up and just taking your stuff, the only thing that stops my businesses from getting my staff or myself or anybody else that stops them from stealing from us is because our police exist. Is because if you steal from us, there is a law and it will be enforced. That's it. That's what's stopping it from happening. And this magical world you think where you can get rid of the police and replace them with this and that is completely false. And look at what direction you're going in. As this kind of sentiment has gone on, we've seen police staffing get get less and less across the field in all positions, but including Louisville, including Lexington, people leaving those areas. They no longer want the police there. You're seeing them adopting policing strategies as well that are negative to the citizens, but it removes police officers from being in possible problematic situations and complete and utter common sense. I mean, you have the president of the United States at times coming out and saying, oh, you should just shoot him in the leg. Clearly somebody who's never shot a gun before has no clear understanding of how to handle a firearm and how you can't pull those shots off. And I remember this was a few years ago, these advocates, are saying, look, we need a lot of police reform. Police are out here. They're shooting unarmed people. And they were big political activists regarding the, police being too not controlled enough in a response. And so they sent these activists, there's like 4 or 5 of them, and they sent them into a simulator. And they said, okay, these are simulators. These are use of force simulators. And every single one of them failed, as in they used force quicker than what would be acceptable. These people who say the police are using force too quickly would not have been able to make it on the police department because they use force too quickly when in these simulators. That tells you these people, it's easy to be a armchair quarterback, as people say during sports. Well, it's easy to be an armchair police officer, but you can't understand what these people are going through. I'm not a police officer. I can't understand what they're going through. But yet this kind of disrespect, this is how your communities get worse. This is what happens. People are not going to suddenly start behaving, clearly. But instead, your communities get worse and worse. And what do? You vandalize monuments. Let me ask you this. Would you be a police officer? In a day and age where completely responding in a reasonable manner can get you your life destroyed, possibly thrown in jail, facing court charges, in a place where you risk your life for people who literally don't even care. They don't care so much that they'll destroy your monument. To be in a city that doesn't respect you, I mean, what do you think the chances are? The city council there in Louisville is going to take a vote to protect that monument. I don't think so. What do you think the chances are the city of Louisville is going to come in and say, look, we're going to enhance the crime of destroying this monument. We're going to put up some cameras to help law enforcement protect this area. We're going to make it clear that this isn't acceptable in this city. No, not at all. You see, protests in the streets, the minute they think, oh my gosh, this cop shot a person with a knife. He had a gun. He had a knife. He couldn't just karate chop it out of his hand. Let's protest in the streets. Let's vandalize businesses. Let's destroy other people's lives that have nothing to do with anything. But then when you have monuments like this going on, where's the pushback from the other side? Where are the people saying this is unacceptable? I tell you what, we have got to stand up for law enforcement and show our appreciation. And that includes by coming out and saying these types of things aren't acceptable and coming out and supporting them in more ways than just words, but in actions and deeds, because this is the bottom line. You have a shortage of police officers everywhere. And crime is on the rise. Plain straight, crime's been on the rise in Kentucky for the last several years, especially in cities like Louisville and Lexington. Without these police officers, without this law enforcement, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And doing things like this is going to continue to cause us issues and shortages that result in a net negative on our lives, a loss of quality of life, because you can't even exist without crimes being committed against you, and yet nobody has to pay for doing that. We're going to be talking about our state school board. This state school board promulgates the regulations that our local counties school boards follow. These regulations are promulgated on these counties, and they're given the right to do this because of the SEEK formula. And the SEEK formula, what happens is in our general fund, a fund that your general tax dollars go to, your sales tax, your income tax, your other taxes, they go into this general fund, and then that gets sanctioned out. In this case, about half of it goes to our SEEK fund, which is our educational fund, and that then goes out to our K through 12 education. And this board gets to promulgate regulations. Now this, to give a little bit of a background of why this is news and why this has become such a big issue, when Beshear first came into office, he cleared out a lot of these individuals that were sitting on this board, and some would say illegally. In fact, he came under some fire for doing that, and he did it for clearly political purposes. A lot of those members were appointed by Republican, and therefore he was saying, look, this school board is promulgating conservative ideas into our schools, or at least promulgating conservative viewpoints. I want a liberal school board. And what has this liberal school board done? Well, we've seen a principal in Anderson County getting suspended because of policies that this board has put out there. One of those policies being, and this was the one he got suspended for, it was a policy that said if your children began transitioning at school, or said, I want to be called by different pronouns, or was otherwise identifying as LGBTQ, the school is not, without that child's permission, is not to share that with the parent. And that principal came out and said, this is insane, rightfully so. He said that if a child is dealing with this, I am going to tell the parent. If a child is saying, I'm identifying as this, the parent deserves to know, especially considering the high suicide rates of children who are going through that. I think a parent needs to know so they can watch for those issues at home, certainly. But the school board regulation was not to do it. In fact, the school board regulation was that if you told the parents, that would actually lead to a suicide from the child, because somehow the parents were causing the high suicide rates, not the fact that this person thinks they're born into the wrong body. But those are the types of policies that this board has put out there. This board that he cleared out of the conservative viewpoint. So he's had these 2 board seats open for about over the last year. So they've been open for longer than a year. And one of which is supposed to go to Republicans. Well, the media came out back about the 21st of May, and was attacking Beshear or calling out Beshear. They're the one attacking. It's the liberal media. They're not going to attack him. What am I saying? Anyways, they came out and they were going after Beshear for having these vacancies languish for so long on such an important board. I mean, the board only has 11 members. So having 2 members vacant, that's about 20%, 17, 18% of the board that is vacant. That's a pretty significant amount. Now, Beshear says that came out at that time and said, look, we're in talks with a person. Keep in mind, he said, we're in talks interviewing a person. In fact, I have an interview this week with that person. And then he points out to say, like, I'm not breaking the law. I'm not fulfilling my duty. I have legally as long as I want. And there's a difference here between what you have the legal right to do and what's the right thing to do. When you have a board that oversees such a large part of government spending, it certainly seems irresponsible to be leaving a board missing, almost 20% of its members. That pushes more and more power into the sitting members' hands. But of course, that's what Beshear wants. Why? Because remember, he cleared that board out. He only wants people who are going to do what he needs to do. And his problem here is he's probably having a hard time finding a Republican willing to promulgate and go along without blowing the whistle on a lot of these discussions that I'm sure they're having, these awful, terrible ideas. So who does he appoint? Well, Beshear comes out and he appoints in Julie Pyle and Diana Woods. Julie Pyle is from Boone County. She is the Republican that he appointed to fulfill it. And she used to be a school board member there. She's a parent. Became involved there. She's never a teacher per se, which is, I think, fine. But she is the president of this thing called Parent Camp, a transformational family school and community engagement. Now, I don't know much about Parent Camp, if I'm to be honest. I clicked around on their website, researched what I could. I had a hard time understanding exactly what it is they do. They have this liberal mumbo jumbo speak that you see so often on a lot of these websites, where it's about taking an equitable and social and emotional learning approach. We will get involved more and more parents into the education, and we're all about creating lanes and getting people to stay in their lanes, but also realizing that everybody can be a teacher. It was just a lot of mumbo jumbo. And of course, so that's probably the goal. I'm sure it's some sort of speak pattern that those kinds of people that buy into that kind of thing understand, certainly. But the basic thing is, by reading through that website, what I came away with is she's probably not the most conservative individual. Maybe she's a registered Republican. But based upon the buzzwords I'm seeing on the website, I'm seeing social emotional learning, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Equity. We hear that term a lot. Understand this. As parents caught on to things like critical race theory, they had to invent new terms. And what they came out with was diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what that means is that, well, we need an equitable and inclusive environment. That means we have to be careful with their learned experiences. We can't treat all the students the same, because all the students haven't had the same life. So therefore, we have to somehow, from our perch, from our pedestal here, that we know more, magically change how we're treating students, because we simply know what they need based upon their backgrounds, which is just false. And also, too, it ignores that students come from a variety of backgrounds and have a variety of issues. We see all these calls to say, well, we need more funding in these minority majority schools because they're having more issues with education. And granted, we need more funding to go where people are having more issues with education, but we're ignoring, what are we supposed to just throw aside the white kids that are also having issues with education? Going to poor white Appalachia, Kentucky, going to poor white rural Kentucky, you're going to find the same educational issues you find in the inner city Louisville. But yeah, inner city Louisville is the one who supposedly needs all the funding, and these rural areas, because they're white, aren't supposed to get the same funding. Those are the kinds of regulations that they promulgate. Those are the talking points. And personally, looking at Julie Pyle, looking at her organization, I don't know how much pushback she's going to give on that. But that's probably why Beshear picked her. That's probably what took so long for Beshear to do. It took him a year. Remember, he said he was only interviewing one person, but yet he appointed two. So he probably already had the Democrat, Diana Woods, picked out. It was Julie Pyle who he was having a hard time finding. Now, Diana Woods lives in Lexington, registered Democrat, former school superintendent, middle school teacher, of course, probably right in lockstep with the general far left crazy liberal talking points that we're seeing. And these educational issues, certainly as we go into this governor's election, are going to be incredibly important. Not only, as I said earlier, does half of our general fund go to this K through 12 education, billions of dollars go to these education. Not only is that going on, but the educational results are getting worse and worse and worse. These kids can't read, they can't write, they can't do math, they can't do basics. Meanwhile, we're seeing all kinds of crazy social issues being pushed out there. And then these social issues coming into the schools, that's going to be a big thing for Beshear on this campaign election. He's going to be hit upon that a lot. That's part of the reason why he needed to fill these positions. I don't think it's by accident that he suddenly had people to fill these positions. You come under fire, and then within a week, you magically, or 10 days, you magically have people appointed to positions that have been empty for a year. Give me a break. Beshear, we know you've been sitting on your butt on that because you haven't wanted to bring in a Republican. You want to leave more power concentrated to those on the board that go more in line with your far left viewpoints. And we'll see if Pyle will come out and hold them accountable on this. If she's going to blow the whistle on some of this far left stuff, like I said, I am dubious based upon her current organization that she's a part of, that will continue to be a part of, which, by the way, that organization gets paid by taxpayer dollars from schools to do things. But hey, probably not a conflict of interest there at all. I'm sure she'll recuse herself from all the contracts they have in Kentucky, if they have any. I don't know. That's certainly something worth digging into and looking into. Well, that's what we have for you today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for conservative constitutional political news and talk going around in Kentucky and local. Remember, get involved. All politics is local, and it's up to you to make a difference. Thank you all so much, and we will see you back here tomorrow with the Andrew Cooperrider Show.